All right, hello world. This is Scott Adams coming to you from my studio in Pleasanton, California with some writing tips. These tips will be applicable to nonfiction writing, specifically for blogging, good for business writing, but also good for any kind of humor writing. So humor, business, blogging, they're all very similar in the writing style. And these are different from fiction writing. If you're going to write fiction, you might want a little flowery prose in your writing. But if you're writing for humor or you're writing for information or news or just blogging, you probably want to get to the point. And that's what today will be about. So I've made a little slideshow here. I'm going to take you through. It'll be really quick. I'm not going to hit any of these points too extensively. So this is the day you became a better writer. At the end of this, everybody watching it will be better. I can guarantee it, because these are really simple tips. Once you hear them, you can't unhear them. They'll just become part of you. All right, these are the topics I'm going to cover. I'm putting this up here only in case you want to screenshot it and remind yourself later, but you don't need to look at these tiny words here. The first tip is, how do you know you have the right topic? That's always the hardest thing with writing, is finding a topic that somebody cares about. And here's a couple of tips that I use. If I've picked a topic that makes me feel something, in other words, I laugh or I groan or I get excited, but some physical change in my body, that's what I'm looking for. Because if it can't influence me, it's probably not worth writing, because it's not going to influence anybody else. So you want to go for a feeling. Does it make you feel something? That's the most important part of writing. Next, you want to be writing in a way that your audience, whatever kind of audience you have in mind, finds it familiar. In other words, they understand the topic. All right. You don't want to write strange things for an audience. All right. People can't change too much within the time that they're reading something. So you want to match the audience. That's a bigger deal than you think, because I started out not doing that. It took a professional to tell me, hey, you're writing for yourself. You're writing things that just you would like, but the audience doesn't. And once you realize that you're writing for the audience, you're not writing for yourself, it does change how you write. I also use a technique that I call the invisible friend. I use this mostly for humor writing. My invisible friend is my brother, Dave. He's actually a real person. But when I'm writing humor, I imagine myself talking to my brother, because he has a kind of sense of humor that I understand really well, pretty similar to my own. So if I say something that in my imagination would make my brother laugh, it's probably pretty good. All right? So that's your first tip. And then, of course, write for the reader, not yourself. So kind of covered that. Your first sentence in whatever you're writing, and this applies to a longer form like a blog post or an article, that one, the first, I was looking at some of your comments, that's why I got derailed. The first sentence in what you're writing should be something that evokes curiosity, all right? Because you don't have a lot of chances to make a first impression. And people will judge whether they want to read the thing based on the first sentence. So I try to make my first sentences in my blog posts, and that's a good place to go look if you want to see some examples, at Dilbert.com. You'll see that my first sentence is usually provocative, and it makes people say, whoa, why do you say that? Where's he going to go with this? Is he going to get in trouble? Where's he taking us? All right, so you want some curiosity out of that first sentence. Next, here's a trick from hypnosis and persuasion. I use a lot of persuasion technique in writing because all writing is persuasion. If you do it right, you're either trying to persuade somebody to laugh or persuade somebody to give you money or just to like you. So there's always some kind of persuasion going on. Pacing and leading is taken from the field of hypnosis, and it has to do with matching your audience or the individual in the case of hypnosis, and being like them in some important ways. If you looked at President Trump's campaign, he tried to be like the normal people, which was hard if you're a billionaire, right? But he managed to pull it off. He spoke the way they speak in simple language. He talked about the things they cared about, and he showed a type of emotion that was compatible with how they felt about stuff. So he paced them. He became one of them in some ways, not in every way, because they're not all billionaires living in, penthouses in New York City. But he finds big places that he can be like them, and that's enough. You don't have to be like people in every way. They just have to find something about you that they can pace and say, yeah, I'm like that, or I think like that, or I dress like that, or I act like that. So whatever you're picking to pace, just make sure that you're consistent with it, and then people will get comfortable with you. And once they're comfortable, at that point they can be led. And what I mean by that is that once you become one of them and they say, yeah, I think the same way you do, then when you start thinking a little differently, they start moving with you because they think, well, if you went there, why wouldn't I? We think alike. All right. So this trick is very important in writing. You'll see me use this a lot. You'll see the phrasing like, I know you're thinking this now, so here's the answer. So I'll actually call out what people are thinking, and I'll talk about that a little bit more too. All right, here's one of the more important writing tips. If you only remember a few of them, remember this one. Write in direct sentences. A direct sentence is the subject did something. In this example, the boy hit the ball. An indirect sentence tells you exactly the same information, but it's indirect. So if you said the ball was hit by a boy, anybody who read those two sentences, the boy hit the ball or the ball was hit by a boy, they know exactly what you're saying. Those two things mean exactly the same thing. But your brain processes the direct sentence quicker, more effortlessly. Right? And if you're writing a long piece, you need your audience not to get tired in the process of translating what you mean to how they understand it. So if you write in direct sentences, it just goes right in. The boy hit the ball. If you say the ball was hit by the ball, if you say the ball was hit by the boy, then people have to do a little extra work. You barely notice it when you're just looking at one example. But if you did a lot of this sort of thing, where you make people work too hard for your writing, they get exhausted. Right? So direct sentences when you can. Really, you should always, there's really no exception to that. Direct sentence every time. All right? Next tip is about jargon and adjectives and adverbs. If you're doing business writing and blogging, you usually want to avoid adjectives and jargon, adverbs and cliches. And one of the tricks to doing that is something I heard a long time ago, and I found it very useful, so I'm going to pass it along. Once you've written something and you're going over it to edit it and tighten it up, imagine that somebody's offering you $100 on the spot for any word you can take out of your writing that still keeps the meaning about the same. So an example I like to give is if I were to say, tomorrow is going to be very hot, you would know exactly what that meant. Oh, it's going to be very hot tomorrow. But suppose I said, tomorrow is going to be hot, and I leave out very. Well, you might say to yourself, those are slightly different, because very hot makes me think a little hotter. Hot, well, that could be hot too, but I feel like there's something that's different about those two things. But here's the important point. Your reader can't tell the difference. And by tomorrow, they're certainly not going to remember that word very. You know what they're going to remember? Tomorrow is going to be hot, all right? So it turns out that there are a lot of words that you as the writer think are important. But when you realize that your reader is only going to remember a tiny amount of what you wrote the next day, and that's what you're writing for. You're writing to make somebody remember you, right? If you're not remembered after you read, you haven't done anything, okay? So keep in mind that the reader is going to subtract out all those words that didn't mean much to them. So they're going to take out the adverbs. They don't care that you were running very fast. You were just running fast, all right? Or even just that you were running. Does it matter how fast? Probably not. Depends on the context. But if you get rid of all your jargon, your buzzwords and all that stuff, your reader's going to be much happier. And that's one of the more important tips you'll see. People will translate brevity in their minds into thinking that whoever was so brief, so long as they made their point, is smarter than people who take too many words to say the same thing. Now, we're just wired that way. Now, you could say it's Occam's razor. You could give lots of reasons for why we think that way. But the fact is that brevity is equated with intelligence. We all process it that way. Now, some people go the other direction, and they think, especially in a corporate context, they think, I'd better throw in some big words and some technical jargon. I'd better be complete, because that will show how smart I am. Turns out we don't process it that way. When people hear somebody who's really technical and they know a lot, and they're explaining it in great detail, even if the explanation is very complete and very good, it's not going to register as being entirely smart. It will look like somebody was knowledgeable, like they knew a lot of stuff, but they were kind of dumb about the way they presented it. Compare that to someone who can condense all that into a statement or a few brief important points. That person is going to look like the brilliant person in the argument. All right? So when you're writing, brevity. Brevity is key. Try to stick with something like a 6th grade vocabulary. You probably also remember when President Trump was being criticized over a year ago for having such a simple vocabulary. Now, most of us believe he does know big words. He just chose not to use them. And it was probably exactly the right choice, because it allowed him to pace, his readers, to be like them, to talk the way they understand. But it also is just better communication. It's a better way to write. It's a better way to talk. You've been listening to me now for 10 minutes or whatever. I don't use very many big words, and that's intentional. It's not that I don't know big words. I know a few big words. I choose not to use them. Here's a tip that I haven't seen from other people, but it's important to me, so I'll include it. Sentences have a musicality to them. And by that I mean there are certain letters that have hard sounds like K and T. And if you string together a sentence that has them in the wrong place, it's just going to sound ugly. Now, I can't put more formula on that, but some things just sound ugly. Let me give you an example of something that has a good, what I call percussion, meaning that the hard sounds are in the right place, they're spaced out just right, and it makes it fun to say it in your head, all right? Here it is. Make America great again. Do you hear the percussion? Make America great again. You can almost feel it musically when you say it. All right? Now compare that to Hillary Clinton. One of her more famous campaign slogans was "Stronger Together." It just doesn't have the same musicality to it. Now I can't give you more definition to it than that, but you know musicality when you see it. You know that a sentence feels right, it has the right pacing, it has the right beat to it. So I look for those things. So that's one of the filters I do in a final pass. I try to get the musicality of my sentences right. I also try to avoid ugly words like moist and talc. Most people recognize those words as just ugly. And you learn after a while that this is true of most words. Almost every word, if you gave somebody a choice and say, what do you think of this word? People would say, I like that word, or I don't like that word. People have a preference for just the word. So if you have a choice of using the ugly word versus the good word, use the good one. Now, some of you watching this know that I have popularized the phrase moist robots. And I'm doing, apparently, what I said you should not do. The word moist in writing is so ugly that you shouldn't use it. But because I'm a professional, don't try this at home, I have combined moist with robot, two things that don't go together. So I've taken your brain a whole different place. So in that specific context, I can use the ugly word because I'm pairing it with a robot. The two don't fit. It makes you wonder what I'm up to, makes you curious, it sticks in your mind. So there's other things going on when I use it in that context. Here's a tip I've never seen in writing. I don't know if I invented this one, or maybe other people say it and I'm just not aware of it. But sometimes people make the mistake of putting a wrong association together, harmlessly, but they don't realize that simply associating two things causes people to think in a certain way. Let me give you an example. Let's say I said to you, two things that I really like are, and here's my list, two things that I really like are babies. I love babies. Babies are cool. And automatic weapons. I really like automatic weapons. I like owning them and shooting them and stuff. Do you see the problem already? Now, all I was doing is listing two completely unrelated things that I happen to like. I like babies. I also like automatic weapons. It turns out I don't really like automatic weapons, but I'm using that for an example. Now, the problem is, and I think all of you experienced it as I was doing it, as soon as I said automatic weapons and babies, you automatically associated them in their mind, and it came to this horrible thing. It's like, are you talking about using an automatic weapon on my baby? Right? I didn't say that. Wasn't thinking that. I was not trying to do anything like that, but your brain just associates them automatically. Some of the biggest trouble I've ever gotten into are because I made this mistake. Some of you know that story. I won't repeat it, but I have made the mistake of associating two things in a sentence, very clearly not saying that they're the same or even related, but people read it that way. All right, use visual language wherever you can. We're visual people. Our visual sense dominates every other one of our senses. Google something called the McGurk effect if you want to see that in the most stark way. That's McGurk, M-C-G-U-R-K. It's the first thing that'll come up on a Google search. It's a little, and here's how stark this is. It's a video of a guy who's saying the word ba, B-A-H, ba, 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 and then they change the video so his lips are forming what you think would be F-A-H, fa, 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 but they play over it the ba, ba, ba. And what happens is your brain sees the lips making a ba movement, and your ears start hearing fa, even though you know it's saying ba. And it happens in real time. Now, when you've seen this, you realize how powerful the visual is. That seeing the lips form one kind of sound makes your ears hear another sound in real time while you know it's happening and you know the trick, and it still works. It's the most freaky thing ever. That's how powerful visual persuasion is. So when you see, let's say, Donald Trump say, I'm going to build a wall, instead of saying, well, I'd like to beef up border security in a number of ways. It'll probably be different solutions for different parts of the territory. Nobody cares about that. It's easily forgettable. But if you say wall, suddenly people can see it. When President Trump talks about ISIS, he doesn't say, well, it's a problem and we need to take care of it. He says, they're chopping off heads. They're putting people in cages and drowning them. It's all visual. This comes directly from the most famous person who talks about this is Jerry Spence, famous trial lawyer who wrote a book in which he talks about how to convince a jury by using visual persuasion. You put them in the scene, you describe it. Now, it also helps if you can add a few other senses. You know, put them in the scene and have them smell something, feel something, hear something, taste something. That's even better. But if you're in a hurry, just go visual. I like to violate a norm when I'm writing, and by that I mean there should be something about your writing that makes the reader a little bit uncomfortable. If you go too far, they don't want to read it, they're just going to click off. But there should be something about your writing that feels a little dangerous, all right? And I choose that word carefully. Danger is something we love to read if it applies to other people. We don't like to be in danger ourselves. But if you're reading something by an author and you're thinking to yourself as you're reading it, man, that author is going to get in a lot of trouble, or this group is going to be really mad at this author, That's where you want to be. You want to feel there's some danger, there's some norm has been violated, and not everybody's going to like it. You should end your pieces on some clever or provocative thought. That's easier said than done. The most common way to do it is what's called a callback. In other words, if there's something you mentioned and it was kind of funny or interesting in the body of your article, and it was, let's say it was the most interesting or provocative thing you said, then it's often good to make a clever reference to it in your closing statement, or to be provocative about something that's coming because of all this. Being clever or provocative is easy to say, it's hard to do. You probably have to be clever to pull it off. Writing is like every other skill. If you do it every day, you'll get better at it. If you do it once in a while when you feel inspired, you won't. And I have experimented both ways. I've gone for months without writing something in blog or book form. And then when I try to do it again, it's really hard. And it can take weeks of writing to get back up to where I was when I was writing a lot. So one of the reasons I blog is not just for the reader's benefit. It's practice. I blog as often as I can, primarily for practice. And it makes a huge difference. If you plan to be a writer and you're not writing every day, you're not really taking it seriously, because people who want something practice, and they don't do it just once in a while. Let's talk about my humor formula. This applies to comic strips or stand-up comedians or any kind of written form. I discovered this formula, this is my own, years ago. I realized that there was a formula to what makes something funny. And specifically, the formula is this. You need at least 2 of what I call the 6 dimensions of humor. All right? They are clever, naughty, bizarre, cruel, cute, and recognizable, and I'll talk about each of those in a second. Now, if you can work 3 or more of those in, that's better. But you need at least 2 to be a joke. All right? To be humor, you need 2 of these elements. Now, I know what you're thinking. See what I just did there? I anticipated what you're thinking. That's another persuasion trick. You're thinking, I don't believe this is universally true, right? You're thinking, yeah, I don't think there's a formula for humor. I think it's just surprise or something like that. No, this formula works every time. I've been tracking this for, I don't know, 15 years or whatever it's been. I've never seen an exception. So I can't say there isn't one, but I haven't seen it. All right, so let's run through these. Clever would be, let's say, a play on words. You recognize clever when you see it. It's just combining things that people didn't think you were going to combine, but yet you somehow made it work. Let me give you an example of that. I tweeted the other day that France was expecting to elect a Trump-like candidate. And here I was referring to Le Pen. And then the clever twist on it was, but instead of electing a Trump-like candidate, they elected a rich white guy with business experience and not much government experience, which of course describes Trump. So most people would just simply recognize that as being clever. So clever is one of those things, you know it when you see it, right? Naughty is usually just sex or bathroom jokes. I don't need to go into that. I'm not a big fan of naughty, but the fact is that it's one of the dimensions of humor. And if you can fit naughty into a joke in a clever way, it almost always works. Even people who don't like naughty jokes, if there's a clever component there also, the 2 of them are very powerful. All right, bizarre just means 2 things out of place. If you remember the old comic The Far Side, Gary Larson used to have talking animals in just about every comic, it seemed. And when you have an animal talking, well, that's bizarre. So anything that's bizarre is automatically powerful in terms of humor. But it's not enough. Simply a talking animal would not be funny. You need something else. You need one of the other dimensions of humor. All right, and there's more than one way to be bizarre. Talking animals are not the only way. Cruel. Cruelty is a staple in humor. So cruel just means something bad happened to somebody or you said something unkind to somebody. You know cruel when you see it. Cute is usually just kids and animals. If you look at the comic strip Calvin and Hobbes, there was a cute kid and a cute animal, and the animal talked, and sometimes it was a stuffed animal, and sometimes it was a real tiger. So he had bizarre, he had cute in every comic, and here's the key. Before he even started writing, he had cute and bizarre covered, all right? So if you're wondering why people say, oh, that Calvin and Hobbes comic was the best comic of all time, it's not an accident. All right, it might be an accident that he settled on this formula, but once he had it, this thing worked. I mean, this is hardcore, really good humor formula. If you start with something bizarre and cute, kids, animals, talking animals, whatever they do, if they do anything even a little bit clever, it will register in your mind as, oh my God, that's good. Now, I've said before that Watterson looks like a great writer who really isn't. But the outcome of his art does look like great writing because he combines it with so many levels on the humor dimension that when you read it, you think, man, that is good writing. And it is, but in the sense that he's combined all the elements. So in that sense, it's great writing. Recognizable. Humor usually requires that you recognize something about the subject of the joke being like your experience or like yourself. All right? It's either like somebody you know, like you, but it has to be familiar, something you recognize. This is the trick behind Dilbert's success. Originally, Dilbert was a generic comic in which Dilbert would sometimes be at work, but it really wasn't about the workplace. And it wasn't until I listened to readers who said, hey, we like it when he's at work, put him back at work, that I did that. And then Dilbert took off because people said, yeah, I recognize that. It's automatically funny to me because it's about me. All right. So if you make a comic or any form of humor that people recognize as, oh, that's me, or oh, that's my spouse, or anybody you recognize, the bar for making that funny goes way lower. It just is so much easier to make a joke about something that you recognize in the beginning. All right, so those are my tips for writing. When I edit this later, this is live streaming originally, I'll probably edit out the part that comes after this, but I'm going to look at your questions now. They're streaming in from on YouTube. So does anybody have any questions about writing? We'll just keep it on topic for today. Yeah, if you wanted to see more on my writing, you would look at this book. It's called this is my latest book, How to Fail at Almost Everything and Still Win Big. So you'll see examples in there of everything I talked about. The visual writing, the humor formula, it's all in there. It's all in there in the form of execution, not lessons. And then my other book, God's Debris, is a good example of using simplicity to make somebody sound smarter. There's a character in God's Debris, that's fiction, by the way, that is allegedly the smartest person in the world. And the way I write for the smartest person in the world, since I'm not the smartest person in the world, is I keep his language simple. And it doesn't seem like that should work, but when you read it, you'll see that it does. Where do you get your ideas from? What inspires you? All ideas are combinations of other ideas. So the more things you expose yourself to, and I'm kind of an autodidact, meaning I like to learn things on my own. And I also have a wide field of interest. So I'm always, dipping into articles online and in different fields and different disciplines. And if you see enough stuff, things just come together in your mind. You go, oh, that reminds me of this thing, but if you added this to that, that would really be funny. How can I overcome laziness and write more? Writing is a sort of thing that I don't think you should do it unless you have a lot of discipline or a lot of, I suppose passion. I hate to say passion because it's overrated, but you need something to make you do it. And if you can't get out of your chair and do it, it doesn't matter that you're good at it, right? If you're not going to do it, it doesn't matter if you're good at it. Any advice for using titles and subtitles? Well, nothing that isn't obvious. I mean, your title has to grab people, it has to be easy to remember. You don't want it to be associated with something that has a negative connotation. So most of what I said about writing would apply to the title as well. Who are some of your favorite writers? Let's see, David Sedaris, Dave Barry, pretty much anybody named Dave. Is NLP BS? Much of it is, but it's based on real stuff. What writers make you think, I wish I'd written that? Scott Alexander. And I can't remember the name of his blog. His name is apparently a pen name, so that he keeps his real name hidden. Yeah, but Scott Alexander, if you just Google him, you'll see stuff that blows you away. What do you do when people attack you for something you wrote, taking it out of context? It depends what it is. 99% of the time, don't care. It's just somebody saying something will have no impact on me or my reputation or anything else. Once in a while, I have to use my persuasion to clarify. But in general, I'm not bothered by it emotionally. I'm sort of well past the point where people's complaints would bother me. All right. Do I draw mind maps? No. Is there a difference between speaking and writing? Yes. There's a big difference. When you speak to an audience, for example, the standard for humor is much lower. You can make an audience laugh more easily than you can in writing. There's something about being in person that makes people just a little more likely to laugh. Do you agree with Orwell in using Germanic over Latin-derived words when writing? I've never heard that writing tip, actually. So I don't know what that's all about. What's more difficult, the thinking or the writing? Probably, well, I would say that the thinking is more rare, but the writing is more difficult. You know, in other words, to have a thought that is so good that people want to read about it, that's hard. Yeah, well, it's hard in the sense of being rare. All right. Usually the ideas just pop in your head, so there's not really a sense of working at ideas. But the writing itself is work. Have you ever written a book with pen and pencil first? No, I would never do that. It's been computers all the way. Luckily, I was born in the right era, and I'm a very fast typer or typist. Are there exercises used to practice your tips? Just writing a lot. The more you write, the more you run into these situations. In writing fiction, has outlining plots helped you? Well, one of the reasons that my fiction books are unusually short is that I don't do that. I don't outline my plot in advance. And by the way, I would not claim to have a special talent for fiction. I do think I'm above average as a writer for nonfiction. But for fiction, absolutely, you would not look to me for tips on fiction. I don't use Markdown. And how do I do research? Usually just online, same way everybody does. All right, I'm going to sign off now because this is getting too long and people will say, hey, that's too long, I don't want to see it. I'll edit out some of the parts for a final product on YouTube. Let me ask one more question. Did this work? So just a simple question. Did this work for you? For those of you who watched some of the tips, was it effective? Totally, yes, good. All right. Well, I like to give back if I can. So some of you are going to find this does make you a better writer. Probably all of you. Probably every person who watched this just became a better writer. It would be hard not to, because once this stuff's in your head, it's hard to get it out. All right. Thank you so much. Sincerely, thank you for watching. Thank you for your comments, and thank you for your feedback. And I will see you again.